My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
This is The Other Side of Midnight.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
James Flippin here on The Other Side of Midnight. And right now, joining us on the guest line, a very close friend of mine, one of the most accomplished people in radio that I know personally, and somebody who's been all over the radio and TV map and dial for years, somebody very well known to our WGN listeners in Chicago. I'm talking about Dan Falato. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Mega Kiddos, Brother Flippin.
And of course, you know,
was Rush on that station? Yeah, he was.
Rush was, as a matter of fact. I grew up listening to Rush on 770, our New York City home base affiliate here for Red Apple Audio Networks. And, you know, Dan, that's a good place to start. In essence, you are a guy who has worked in radio for the better part of your adult life. And I believe it was when you were a teenager, maybe, that you even
15.
first got into it. 15. So, you know, radio is kind of a lifelong love affair for you, just really generally speaking. And we'll expound on why specifically we're chatting, because it's this particular week that the reason we met came to a close. What does that mean? I'm talking about the show that Dan and I worked on about 10 years ago, the Artie Lange show, and we'll talk about that. But Dan, how did that whole radio love affair start for you?
Well, I always listened to radio. We were not allowed to watch TV in our house. My mom was against television. So I listened to the radio most of the time. And we had great radio stations here in Chicago and great overnight people. And I would go on the roof of my house and try and get all the radio stations around the country on my little radio. And when I was just about to turn 16, there was a radio station in Waukegan, Illinois, that would play Bruce Springsteen songs other than Born to Run. And so I wrote the guy a letter and I said, your music is awesome. You know, they would play all great Tom Petty stuff and Bruce, but your hosts stink. And so he wrote me a letter back and said, well, if you think you're so funny, write some jokes. So I took the paper and I wrote some jokes, and obviously I stole some jokes from some of the top comedians of the day. I'm sure Bob Newhart or Rodney Dangerfield or somebody. And about 2 weeks later, I happened to be home and my parents weren't. And he called me and he said, hey, my overnight guy quit. Do you want the job? And I said, yeah. And he had no clue how old I was. I hadn't turned 16 yet, and it would not have interfered with my high school stuff. So I took the job, and Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer, who were legendary here in the Midwest, were driving to Milwaukee, and he heard me one night, and he said, who is this guy? We got to get this guy to work for us. And that's how I got started with Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer. And then a couple months later was Disco Demolition, where we exploded onto the national scene. And the rest was history with Steve and Gary.
Wow. So, I mean, Dan Falato, our guest here on The Other Side of Midnight, how far into that overnight radio journey as a host were you picked up by Steve and Gary to be their producer? How many years in?
3 months. It was only 3
Wow.
months.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
I thought I could either go from Waukegan to Kenosha to to Madison to Milwaukee, or I could stay in Chicago with two guys that I thought would explode onto the market, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Right after Disco Demolition, I mean, it was the biggest story in the country for 2 or 3 days.
Right.
And,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. And in all the disco Netflix and Amazon and all the documentaries about the Bee Gees, Disco Demolition was the sole reason why disco just plummeted.
Yeah, a fascinating story in and of itself, the Disco Demolition, and you'll have to tell us that at some point, maybe even here tonight. But I wanted to ask you, Dan, about your time working with the Cubs on the radio and how that was just such an amazing experience for you. You were the executive producer on WGN for the radio broadcasts for years. I mean, how was that? Was that like a highlight for you? I mean, you're such a Cubs fan.
Oh,
what was that like for you?
Yes. Well, it was amazing because, first of all, when I started doing the Cubs, it was still all day games. And I didn't have to be in work until probably 11. So I would go in around 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would go have a cup of coffee. I would go to the Cubs locker room, go have a cup of coffee, and then go up in their booth and watch the sun come up. And to see that every morning, I thought, and then at that point, we had just hired Ron Santo, who was my childhood hero, and as a broadcaster, and I was the deciding vote on Tom Brenneman. We were looking for a new play-by-play man to go along with Harry Carey, and it was between Tom Brenneman, Joe Buck, and Ted Robinson from San Francisco. And I said, there is no way we're gonna get the St. Louis Cardinals out of Joe Buck, and there is no way we're gonna get the San Francisco Giants out of Ted. But I think because Tom has just come out of college, we might be able to beat the Cincinnati Reds out of it. and we hired Tom Brenneman, Bob Brenly, and Ron Santo, and that was my guys. And it was amazing. And then while I was working with Stephen Gary, I was down in Peoria, and I happened to see a sportscast, and the sportscast talked about it was an interview with Pete Van Nokken, and they were asking him why he had suspended a player after a game, but then unsuspended him. And he's telling the story, and he brings on the player, and that player is Mark Grace. And I'm watching this, and I am laughing in Peoria, and at this bar, watching these two talk. And when Mark Grace got called up by the Cubs, I said, we have to hire this kid. And WGN said, we're not going to hire somebody. We don't even know he's going to make the team. So I took my bonus, and I said, I'll tell you what, I'll call his agent. I bet you that it'll happen. And so I did. And I said, but I get to renegotiate and get a piece of his contract next year. And WGN agreed to that. And we hired Mark. And then Mark and I became roommates because he kept on locking himself out of his house. His wife had moved to California to become an actress, and he kept on locking himself out of the house. So he moved in with me, and we became roommates for 11 years. So to go to Wrigley Field and be in charge of that broadcasting and the team that I grew up loving, it was amazing. It was not even like work. It was fun all the time.
Yeah.
And obviously to have that in with all the players, I got to meet every player imaginable. I'm picking up Cal Ripken Jr. off a street corner at 4 o'clock in the morning because we couldn't find him. Barry Bonds is trying to have me kicked out of a players only room until he realizes who I am. It was an amazing time. Some of the best times we ever had were in New York because all those guys loved the Mets and the Yankees both tried to get Mark Grace, and we would go to parties all the time in New York. So that was some of my funnest times at Shea Stadium, even though we called it the bunker. those were some of my best times.
Yeah. And you and I both went to a game together at Citi Field, but we did not, unfortunately, know each other when Shea Stadium was still around, or else that would have been a fun experience too. Dan Falato, our guest here, and he's a radio guy who goes back to, I mean, you heard it there, roommates with Mark Grace, executive producer with the Cubs radio broadcast, going back with Steve and Gary, Disco Demolition. I mean, this is a guy who honestly should have a movie made about his life. I'm not even kidding. But in terms of how we know each other, Dan, it was earlier this week that it would have been exactly 11 years to the day that the show we first worked on together was canceled. So I just want to throw it out there for you, taking it back to that era, the Artie Lange show, which started as the Nick and Artie show and was on radio, also TV. What are your overarching memories of that particular era? And I know that's a loaded question because you have so many eras, including Artie. Let's say we could talk about the podcast. We could talk about a lot of different stuff. But if I was going to take you back to that radio / TV show era, what are your overarching memories?
Oh, I love doing the show, and to work with Artie, you know, he was so funny and such a good interviewer. And when people started to notice the show and we started to get ratings, and it was such an unbelievable feeling for me, because this is something that I kind of built from the ground up, and I didn't want the job. And when they agreed to everything that I wanted to do, except one thing, there was one thing they would not agree to, and that was the thing that killed the show, which is we had to be in charge. I said, every comedian there's going to be a fight at the bat rack for a punchline, and they're all going to go for it. And we have to, you know, keep a tight rein on them. And that's exactly, when the show ended, the big guy, the big boss, said to me, I wish we had listened to you at first when we interviewed you, because that's exactly what happened. Everybody was running for a punchline, and nobody was paying attention to the regular part of the show. And, you know, that's the one thing that I do regret not demanding that a little more. But it was so much fun. And when we started to get ratings and people started to watch, and it was really fulfilling, and I had a great time. Obviously, you and I had an enormous amount of laughs. The people that we had on that show were amazing, and the show did not get canceled because of poor ratings or they didn't know how to sell it. It got canceled because AT&T was about to buy DirecTV, and in a weird circumstance, they called me up and they said, hey, listen, we're having a conference call, but nobody at DirecTV knows how to work the video equipment. Can you come and help? And they're talking about the merger, and I had to sign something that said I won't talk about whatever they talk about on the video conference. And it was a merger, and the Artie Lange show was brought up. They said, listen, you know, this huge merger, we can't have that guy on because the Chris Culliver thing had just happened. And for people that don't know what happened with Chris Culliver, he did an interview with Artie at the Super Bowl in New Orleans that I begged him to reconsider. And it just blew up around the entire world. And Jim Harbaugh, who I feel bad for, who's my friend, and I was his producer here in Chicago, thinks that they lost that game because of what happened with Chris Culliver, because he was worthless during that game.
Mm. And in essence, what happened there was Artie was kind of egging Chris Culliver on at Media Day about whether or not he'd accept having a gay teammate. And what did Chris Culliver say? I'm not with that sweet stuff or something like that?
Yeah, and he started swearing, and I walked him out. I go, Chris, are you sure you want to say that? And he told me to go, you know what, myself. And I go, and I was like, you know what, I can't, this is going to explode. I know this will explode. And so I tried to call Jim, and obviously he had a lockdown because he was in the Super Bowl. He was the coach of the Giants and 49ers. Mm-hmm. And I tried to call everyone I knew at the San Francisco 49ers, because I had a lot of friends there, because a chef for Mr. DeBartolo lived with me for about 3 or 4 years with me and my family. So I tried to get a hold of everybody I could to say, hey, can we get this guy to, re-record this, because this is going to explode. And I didn't get to Jim in time. And I had 10 hours. And then, as you know, the second that tape hit, we played it. It just went all over, and it was instant. They had us on lockdown. We couldn't leave the hotel room. So it was a nightmare for all of us. And then the NFL was about to. They said to DirecTV, "How could you let that air?" And I had called DirecTV and said, "Hey, man, this is exactly what he said." Oh, it'll be great. It'll be great. A lot of publicity for the show. I go, we have the package with the NFL. They're going to be mad. No, it'll be great. Well, it wasn't great. It exploded, and that was one of the things that Direct Ticket, they lost that because of that Chris Culliver thing. They felt they weren't taken care of.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating, man. I mean, that's such an insider thing, an inside baseball type thing that's also very public facing because of the stuff that happened with Chris Culliver. But really, really interesting to think about your instincts as a media guy, knowing the different partnerships that come along with that, how intertwined that all is. You had really good instincts with that. So let's take you back then to the earlier era for that radio show. And by the way, if you're just joining us here on the other side of midnight, Dan Falato is our guest, longtime radio producer, and a guy who is tightly connected to me through the Artie Lange show. That's what we're talking about right now. So in the earlier days of that radio TV show, the Artie Lange show, it was the Nick and Artie show. And you guys were going to be getting picked up, put on DirecTV. It had been having some buzz as a radio show. Tell me the story about my state's senior senator now, Cory Booker. What happened with Senator Cory Booker, who was then at the time, I guess, was he in the Senate at that point, or was he just?
No, no, he was running for. He was just about to announce, or had announced, that he was the mayor of Newark, right?
He was the mayor of Newark, yes.
Right, and then he went. Did he go to Congress for? Did he go to Congress for a year?
That sounds right, because I think there was a gap in between him. He also ran for president at one point, but I don't know if that was while he was still in Congress or whatever. But anyway, so he was basically going to run for Senate at this time.
Yes, yeah, and all the rumors were going around that he was going to run for Senate or whatever, and he happened to come to this golf course. It was a charity event. It was for the Chicago kid that was the center of the New York Giants. Sean O'Hara. Sean O'Hara. And so he already did a bunch of, they had asked Artie to come out and MC, and so he called me up and said, hey, let's record some of this for the show. And I said, oh, great. And so I met him at Trump's golf course, and we interviewed a bunch of people, and the very last one was Cory Booker. And Cory Booker started in with Artie talking about politics, talking about football a little bit. And there had been a story, and I don't remember exactly what was said.
Okay.
But it was a story about Michael Strahan's ex-wife. And there was something that was leaked in the divorce that she said that he would go down in the basement with a bunch of guys, and she didn't know what he did down there. And it was basically saying that I don't know what was going on down there.
Right.
And so that had happened. And so Artie started talking to him about politics. And then all of a sudden, as you know, Artie was just amazing was getting people into conversations where they think that they can try and be as funny as him or match him. And it just explodes and goes badly. And that's exactly what Cory Booker did. So all of a sudden, Cory starts talking about, well, I don't know if, I don't know what was he doing down there. What is she saying exactly? And of course, then maybe he might be gay came up on the show. They never edited it, so I know that it's on the tape. And or maybe she was trying to say something to us, and he had just left Was he on Regis and Kathy? Kathy and was it?
Right. Like he had taken over
right.
for Regis.
Right. And so Artie brought that up and said, "Hey, do you think why do you think Michael had left that show?" And she's Kathy is so hot, blah 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 blah, and
well, at that point, I think it would have been Kelly. No, it would have been Kelly Ripa.
Kelly, I'm sorry, it's Kelly.
Right.
Kelly Ripa. So Artie said, "Why do you think you left that show?" So do you think maybe the article in the paper is true, and they started to talk about homosexuals in the locker room, exactly what Chris Culliver did, and then there was also something in the paper that he was dating a Hispanic actress,
Rosario Dawson.
And they started talking about Hispanic women's butts, and I'm in shock that this guy, having been in New Jersey then for a year, I was in shock. He was saying the stuff that he was, but he was trying to match Artie comedically.
Yeah, and talking about women's butts and Spanish backsides and big badunkadunks and whatever stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. So then it ended. It only went about 10 or 15 minutes. He was not drunk. I don't think he drinks, but he was not drunk. I was looking at him because I'm like, how could this guy be saying this stuff? And so when it ended, I said to him, "Hey, Mr. Booker, are you sure you want to say this?" He goes, "Oh my God, I was such a big fan of Artie on the Howard Stern show. I love Artie. I love his movies. Oh, everyone's going to think it's funny." I go, "Are you sure?" He goes, "Yeah." So we were fine with it. So I went to DirecTV in Lower Manhattan, and I dropped off the tape, and I said, "Hey, listen, the last one's going to be gold." So I sent it to Los Angeles, but they didn't come in until real late at night. And I went to go see it. I went to go see Safe House with Denzel Washington because there was a chance of getting him on the show. I texted him to come on the show, and he had seen it, so he had liked the show. And so I went to go see Safe House, and all of a sudden, about 15 minutes in the movie, you hear, and everyone's looking, and I go, "Oh my God, it's my phone." And I'm seeing all these texts and all these phone calls, and it's every one of Cory Booker's people. So I leave the movie, and they said, "You have to destroy that tape. You have to destroy it." And I go, I already gave it in, and we had just started. So I didn't want to lose my job, and they're like, "You have to destroy this tape. You've got to." So I went back to DirecTV. Luckily, nobody had downloaded it yet. I took it off. I got a call from his head guy, and he said, "Listen," I said, he gave me a number to call. I said, "I got it. I don't think anyone on the other end in Los Angeles heard it. Don't worry about it." So he said, "Listen, I can't tell you what this means. Senator Booker is going to call you, and he's going to take you out to dinner." And we started talking, and then we knew a couple of people. I had told him, I know that Rahm Emanuel watched our show. So he had sent me a couple of comments because Rahm lived right by me in Chicago. So we were friends, and we just started talking. And I said, "Okay, well, he's going to call you and thank you and take you out to dinner." And he never did. Never called.
Wow.
Never took me out to dinner.
Wow.
Never thanked me.
Wow.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Some people, man, some people just have no appreciation for.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I wouldn't vote for him.
Well, see, I know your politics, Dan. So it makes me think that that's the main motivation behind why you wanted to pull the tape. It wasn't actually keeping your job. You were very accomplished at that point. You know, you had yourself taken care of. Like maybe you enjoyed the show and you thought it had potential, but you were like, I got to keep Cory Booker. He's the shining star of the Democratic Party. I got to keep him clean.
Yeah. No chance of that. No chance. There is no chance because he was. I remember there were just a couple of things that I remember seeing in when he was the mayor of Newark, and I was like, okay, talk about grandstanding. And I'm a very, very conservative Democrat. I'm not, and you can, from most of from my area, they're very conservative Democrats. The part of where I live, and I had no skin in the game with Cory Booker. There was no Cory Booker fan club on my end.
Yeah, no, I know that. Dan Falato is our guest. Dan, we'll let you go here in a second because this has been great. A good chance to catch up. But in terms of,
can I tell my real quick my favorite story about Shea Stadium?
Sure, please tell us your favorite Shea Stadium story.
Okay, so they sent me the first year with Ron Santo, Pat Hughes. Ron Santo, Tom Brenneman, and then Bob Brenly. They sent me to all the away games. And one of the very first ones was Shea Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rusty Staub was in the booth next to us. And Ron Santo and Rusty Staub were friends. They liked each other. They were really competitive against each other when they played, but they did like each other a lot. So it was a first game, Cubs won, second game, the Mets won, third game, my roommate, he had just become my roommate, Mark Grace, he had tied the game and sent into extra innings, and the Cubs won. Now, all game, Ron and Rusty were going at each other the entire game. They were pounding on the windows. They were throwing stuff at each other. So when Mark wins the game, Ron jumps up in the air, and his $20,000 Rolex goes flying out the window, and a fan right underneath catches his watch.
Oh,
and
wow.
Ron goes, "Oh, my watch!" And he looks down, and the guy goes, "Mr. Sano, I was a huge fan of yours. You're one of the greatest players I've ever seen. I'll give you back your watch. Can I just get an autographed ball?" And Ronnie goes, "Yes." He goes, so Ron points to the right and says, "Okay, go meet me at those stairs in about 2 minutes," because Ron had to get through all the media people and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm standing there, Tom Brenneman is standing there, and Ronnie's standing there. He goes, "Go to the right, go to the right." He goes, "Okay, Mr. Sano." The guy takes off to the left. He never sees his watch again. We did not stop laughing for probably 2 weeks, and especially because, Ron was the one that had the black cat walk in front of him.
Right. Wow.
And he knew he hated Shea Stadium. If you said, no, if you're going to say, "I'm going to have a new car," he thought you were going to say New York, and he would flinch up.
Wow.
He hated New York so much.
Wow. That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Probably a good thing that he didn't have some third instance at Shea Stadium, or it might have turned out like fatal or something like that. Jeez.
Well, his toupee started on fire.
Okay. So, wow.
All of a sudden, I'm saying on the arm. So New York was one of the cities I always went to. Usually New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Or unless they had a new stadium, then I would also go to that too. So I didn't have to go to every road game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying to Tom Brennan, I go, do you smell something burning? And then all of a sudden, and they called Shea Stadium the bunker because the broadcast booths were for very short people. I mean, I could reach the top of the broadcast booth with my hand, not even like raising it very high.
Yeah.
Because that's how. So all the players and all the broadcasters called it the bunker. And I said around like the second inning or third inning, I go, do you smell something? And I said to our engineer, he goes, yeah, I do. And I go, Ron, do you smell something? And none of us knew where it was coming. And then like we started talking, okay, maybe it was somebody smoking or something. You never know. And then all of a sudden, Ron goes, oh, my hair's on fire. My head's on fire. And so we all jump out of his toupee started on fire. And this is on the air.
What was it, like up against a heater or a light or something like that?
Yeah. They had the really low ceilings, and they had a heater in the booth. And he had it. He must not have paid attention. And, it was a toupee.
Wow.
And he didn't know, you don't notice it right away. And
unreal.
He started, we jump on top of him to put out the fire.
That's amazing. Wow. Shea Stadium. What a house of horrors for Ron Santos. So Dan Falato, right, our guest here. Dan, we're going to let you go. Really appreciate the time here, but I just want to ask if you can indulge.
Anyone who knows Cory Booker, where is my thank you?
Exactly. Where's the thank you, Cory? Where is the thank you for Dan Falato? I want to know as well. So, Dan, last thing before we let you go, I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit because it is now over 10 years since we've known each other. I guess technically speaking, longer than that, since that was the end of that show's run. But what do you remember about when I first joined the Nick and Artie show and kind of how things have gone since then? Me having been involved in the podcast as well. What are your recollections of me being that early board op / sound effects guy?
Well, we started talking about radio so quickly. I knew we would get along, and some aspects of your life I had no clue. I would have never even guessed.
True.
But there were we had such a love of radio, the two of us, and I remember the first 2 or 3 conversations, long conversations about great old broadcasters, whether it be Paul Harvey or Rush Limbaugh, and then you knew I was working with Harry Shearer, which I do still. So I knew that was, and I knew that you also had this sense of humor where you would throw in a sound effect or something at the most awkward time, where other guys would be afraid. Other people, we would have fill-ins sometimes, and because I think you weren't able to make it every night because you had other commitments, and we would have fill-ins, and they would never. Oh no, I can't. And then you would throw in like the most awkward tape, like right in the middle of a Nick and Artie fight, or right when a guest was like putting us to sleep,
right?
Or when there was you would throw it that normally no one would ever risk their job like you did.
Well, I'll tell you a story.
That's when I knew.
I appreciate you saying that because I'll tell you a story that you probably now will remember in particular. When I first started there, it was one of the first nights, and I was kind of getting this test run to be the board op, and a lot of the people that had come in had been like music board ops up until that point. And the one guy, Alan, you remember, who was doing it, it had been too much. He was being overextended. He was really more a consultant, and he was enjoying it, but he couldn't be staying all night in New York City, living in Connecticut. So I got this gig. And so Mike Bichetti, the comedian and announcer, a beloved member of the cast, he said how something was so moist. And Artie immediately reacted to it and said, "Oh, that's so gross to hear you say moist. Like, that's just really, really off-putting to hear you saying those words." And so I immediately marked the tape. And then during one of the commercial breaks, I grabbed it, kind of put it, I compressed it, but put it at a lower volume or whatever, so it would sound a little bit different from the actual live broadcast. and just kind of dropped that in there, as you know, dropped it in with the "It's so moist, it's so moist," and Artie lost it, like was dying laughing, and I think he basically said, "I like this guy. Let's keep him around." And that was like a big moment for me because I was like, okay, you know, if he's liking it, then I got to keep doing it.
That was great. What was the other thing about bread? Was it gluten is the enemy?
Yes. So that was when one of Mike's many ill-fated diets or whatever he was doing, and so he was saying, bread is the enemy. Bread is the enemy, Audie. So I had that drop. Audie, bread is the enemy. And then later during the podcast era, when he stopped by, he'd be talking about Artie's dog, or not Artie's dog, but his sister's dog.
It's his dog.
Yeah. Snuggies or Snuggles or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we had that audio.
My favorite one was Loser-Rooney.
Loser-Rooney. Yeah, because he also had that one blow up call with the guy that was like kind of like clearly egging him on, and he didn't know it. And we had all that good audio. Oh man, we honestly, Dan, some of the best times in radio and just kind of like the whole broadcasting thing, you get paid sometimes to just have a laugh and just enjoy yourself, because that's kind of part of the energy you're trying to put forth. And I laughed my ass off every night that we were doing that Artie Lange show. I know.
When we went down to New Orleans and did the show live at 10:30, we actually exceeded all the rest of the shows on Dan Patrick, and I can't remember who the other person was. It was Rich Eisen at that point.
Yeah.
It was Rich Eisen. We had exceeded their shows in audience. So I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is going to be huge. And then the Chris Culliver thing happens, and then AT&T gets worried. And, there were a couple of times when Artie fell asleep. I'm not going to say that that's the only thing they worried about.
Right.
Artie fell asleep during the show.
Right. Yeah. That was kind of a legitimate problem, unfortunately.
Right. But we had been told by DirecTV that they were drug testing him every week. So there's no way he could have hit it.
Right.
It turns out they never did once.
Well, Dan Falato, excellent guy to talk to just and be friends with in the general sense. But then, as you also heard, a lot of radio memories and radio gold from the past years spanning New York City, Chicago, and really the entire nation. So, Dan, thanks for joining us. Always great to catch up with you here on the other side of midnight.
And I've seen an alien. I just want you to know I've seen aliens.
You have?
Yeah. No.
Well, you know what? That would have been perfect for this show, but that's okay. We'll get into that some other time. Your UFO experience.
I grew up listening to Art Bell. I mean, I loved Art Bell, and then George Norrie actually had me on a show once, and I got Danny Aykroyd on a show another time. But Art Bell was the best, man. Oh my God, he was unbelievable. And then one of my best friends in the world went on to do weekends on Coast to Coast, Ian Punnett.
Yeah,
he sadly passed away about 2 years ago in a medical mistake. But it was. I loved that show. I love Art Bell's show. I had no interest in aliens or anything like that, and you could tell. Every once in a while, Art would try and get into politics, and no one would call in. and then all of a sudden, he'd say, my wife and I were walking through Pahrump, Nevada, and I think we saw an alien the other, and then the phones would go right back.
Yep.
So then it was, and I got to meet him once, and I said, "Is that the night you figured?" Because something big had happened in politics, and he goes, "You know what? I'm going to make it tonight a political night." He started the show with that, and then all of a sudden, nobody called in. And then he went right back to aliens.
You know what, Dan? I guess it's like the current in the ocean. Sometimes you just can't fight against it when it comes to the to the radio airwaves. All right, Dan. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you. We'll talk to you soon.
You too, buddy. See you, buddy.
Thanks for listening to The Other Side of Midnight. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?